When you're taking a Java test, you should assume that the questions relate to Java. That doesn't have to be, and typically will not be, specified. So, for example, if the question simply says which of the following is a built-in data type, and you happen to know that one of the items on the list is built in, say, COBOL, but not Java, then that's not one of the correct answers. Don't let it distract you. Also, make reasonable assumptions about the environment in which a code snippet exists. Questions will regularly include incomplete code that obviously won't compile if what is being shown were the only contents of a source file. Generally, you should assume that there is sufficient context around the example code given, and that the context is not being used to hide sneaky circumstances that make the correct answer code does not compile. So, for example, you should generally assume that two statements in isolation that you're looking at are in a properly formed method, in a properly formed class, that's in a properly named and properly located source file. The point is to ask you about the code in front of you, not for you to say, well, if the source file were located in a directory called banana, then it wouldn't compile because the package is called apple. It might be tempting to think that absolutely everything of this sort should be specified and that the question writers should be absolutely complete. But honestly, you'd find the excess verbiage necessary to achieve this to be horribly distracting clutter. Of course, nothing is completely that simple. There might be circumstances where an omission from the source code in front of you is actually the subject of what you're being tested on. So, for example, if you see a local variable that has been declared but not initialized, then you know that it would be illegal in Java to read the value of that variable. One dead giveaway, however, is that if the code does not compile isn't provided as an option, then you must assume, no matter how egregious the omissions, that all the supporting code is to be assumed. I have no doubt you've been told this since you were in elementary school. Don't spend too long on any question until you've answered all the ones you find easy. Now, the Java Associate exam is not intended to be time constrained. If you're good enough to pass, statistically speaking, you're not going to run out of time. All that said, it is time limited, and it's only sensible to answer the questions you find easiest first. Imagine how stupid you'd feel if you spent a long time trying to get one question answered and then realize you've run out of time, leaving 7 more questions you know you could have answered correctly in much less time. Always take the low-hanging fruit first. The testing software can help you keep track of the questions you've not answered or that you want to go back to. Another fundamental point is to take great care in reading the question. With a multiple choice test, you either get the answer right or wrong. It's not like writing an essay where if you miss the point of the question, the examiner can at least give you some credit for making intelligent and relevant remarks about the topic as a whole. One of the problems with the human brain is that it's essentially lazy. It can think about something if necessary, but it much prefers to come up with a quick answer subconsciously and not actually think. This is compounded by the fact that recognition is much easier than deep cognitive processing. We frequently notice our brains see patterns, lions and tigers in clouds, faces on the surface of Mars. This powerful recognition mechanism is a weakness that is highly significant when taking a multiple choice test. Here's the problem. Our brains are likely to see the beginnings of a pattern in the question and/or the answers and jump to a conclusion. Oh, look, it's about the scope of variables. At this point, our brains shut down, we check the box and move on. But perhaps if we'd thought about the question a little longer, we would have noticed the question was about something else entirely, and in our haste, we blew it. Now, some people are inclined to call questions that trigger this kind of reaction trick questions. Well, I'm sorry, I think that's a lazy excuse. Programming is an art that requires attention to detail, debugging even more so, and jumping to likely-looking conclusions is an excellent way to waste time when debugging. In programming, it's critical to see what's actually there and not what you think should be there. So try very hard to catch your brain in its laziness when it recognizes something prematurely. Take a second extra to look at the question and try and see if you're missing something. Another unfortunate way to lose a mark you should have been able to get is failing to notice negatives in questions. For the most part, question writers deliberately try to avoid using negatives, precisely because it's well known that our brains tend to miss them. Sometimes, however, it's too difficult to phrase the question in a purely positive way, and the result invariably needs us to pay extra attention. So whenever you see a question that says, for example, which one of these is not, focus a little harder, maybe write down some notes, and be very sure that you answer the question that was actually asked and not the exact opposite. As I said though, there shouldn't be too many questions in this form, and hopefully when you do see them, the negative word will be emphasized, perhaps in italic or bold or both. Just keep in mind that this is a standard weakness of the human brain, and you need to consciously compensate for it. Very occasionally, you might be asked to make a value judgment. If so, keep in mind what you know about conventional wisdom and go with the popular perspective, even if it contradicts your own personal viewpoint. For example, some people do not value encapsulation and think that member variables inside objects can be public with impunity. Indeed, some languages do not support this form of encapsulation at all. However, you're probably aware that the conventional wisdom in Java circles is that encapsulation is a good thing. Therefore, if this were the subject of a particular question, it would be reasonable to consider an answer that favors encapsulation in this form as being potentially correct. Sometimes your choice will be simplified by having only one opinion in it and the rest being based on hard facts. Certainly, if a hard fact is correct and an opinion is questionable, then go with the hard fact. Conversely, if all the factual answers are incorrect, then go with the opinion. Questions might ask for the best answer, and you believe there are two or more answers that could actually be correct. In these circumstances, it's often a good idea to consider whether one particular answer is always correct, and the other answers are only correct if certain specific and typically unmentioned conditions apply. In such a situation, the answer that is always correct would qualify as the best answer. Similarly, if one answer is true under the exact circumstances specified in the question, but another answer is true only with variations of conditions, then you should go with the answer that fits the exact circumstances stated. You might also sometimes come across an answer that is true but incomplete, and if another option is true and complete, then choose the one that is true and complete.